Zeppelin. I met this new guy, this drummer, John Bonham. Nobody ever heard of him.
For over 50 years, Carmine Appice hasn't just been a drummer. He's been a foundational force in rock and roll. From the thunderous power of Vanilla Fudge to his work with giants like Rod Stewart and Ozzy Osbourne, he's more than earned his legendary status. This is the guy who wrote the first best-selling rock drumming instructional book, held the first ever drum clinics across the globe, and literally defined realistic rock drumming for generations. He's seen it all, played with everyone, and kept things professional. But what happens when a legend gets to be 78 years old? Well, the professional courtesies start to fade, and the real stories come out. Now, hate is a strong word. But Appice is finally opening up about the drummers he clashed with, the ones whose styles drove him crazy, and the rivalries that have simmered for decades. These aren't just small disagreements. These are the stories of ego, artistry, and animosity from a man who had a front-row seat. Carmine Appice is a true pioneer. Before John Bonham was a household name, before Ian Paice was driving Deep Purple, Carmine was laying down the blueprint for heavy rock drumming. He was part of an elite circle of friends and innovators, giants like Ginger Baker, Keith Moon, and Bonham himself, who were all inventing the art of rock drumming in real time. But when you're a pioneer, you have a vision. You have a standard. And throughout his career, Appice has watched as some of the world's most famous drummers have, in his eyes, betrayed the very soul of the instrument. He's seen showmanship replace skill, attitude replace technique, and a complete disregard for the fundamentals he holds sacred. For years, he's dropped hints and sharp critiques, but now we're putting together the definitive list based on his own words and well-documented opinions. These are the drummers who, for one reason or another, represented everything a purist, like Carmine Appice stood against. Kicking off our list at number 6 is a drummer who sits behind the kit for one of the biggest bands in history, Metallica's Lars Ulrich. For Carmine Appice, Lars represents a seismic shift in rock music, a shift he views with a whole lot of suspicion. To get why Appice has an issue with Lars, you have to understand where Carmine comes from. He's a student of the craft, a disciple of jazz legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, master technicians. He's the guy who literally wrote the book on drumming education, Realistic Rock, to legitimize the instrument. For Appice, drumming is a language built on precision, fundamentals, and discipline. Then came thrash metal and Lars Ulrich. Appice actually credits Metallica with starting heavy metal as we know it today, with their buzzsaw guitars and fast bass drums. But that wasn't exactly a compliment. He saw Ulrich's style not as an evolution, but as a rejection of technique. He's called this new wave of metal drumming punk rock flailing, a style that to him told young players that aggression was more important than skill. It was a movement that suggested you could skip the practice room, ignore the fundamentals, and just hit things as hard and as fast as you could. This philosophy is the exact opposite of everything Carmine Appice stands for. He believes the legacy of drumming is a torch passed from one generation to the next, with each building on the last. The DIY ethos of Ulrich and his peers felt like they were throwing that torch on the ground. As Appice once said about this, broader shift, a revolution should advance technique, not abandon it for primitive caveman beating. While he wasn't talking about Ulrich directly, that sentiment perfectly sums up his feelings. Appice sees the drummer as the precise engine of the band. It's all about playing in the pocket and serving the song with a solid groove. When he heard the early raw playing of Lars Ulrich, his trained ears likely heard something frantic, untethered, and undisciplined. The focus on pure speed and volume, without the technical control he valued, seemed to turn drumming from a nuanced art form into a contest of brute force. And sure, Appice is a showman, but his flair was always backed up by serious chops. With the rise of bands like Metallica, the image and energy often took center stage. So Appice's critique of Lars isn't just about one guy's playing, it's a critique of a whole school of thought that says passion is a substitute for practice. For a lifelong educator like Carmine Appice, that's a cardinal sin, landing Lars Ulrich squarely on this list as a symbol of a movement that led a generation of drummers astray. At number 5, we have a drummer who turned rock and roll into a high-wire act, a guy as famous for his flying drum kits as for his beats, Mötley Crüe's Tommy Lee. If Appice's problem with Lars was philosophical, his issue with Tommy Lee is far more direct. It's a classic clash between a musician who values substance and a showman who, in Appice's view, turned the drum kit into a circus prop. Carmine has a long history with Mötley Crüe. He was playing with Ozzy Osbourne when they gave the Young Hungry Band their first big break on tour. He had a front-row seat to the birth of the Tommy Lee phenomenon. And while he and Tommy became friendly, Lee even went over to Appice's house to watch old Gene Krupa videos, there was a huge gap in how they saw the instrument. Appice has reportedly called a certain type of 80s drummer a stuntman who happens to own a drum kit, and it's pretty clear who he had in mind. The spinning cages, the roller coaster solos, it was all part of the MTV-fueled excess of the 80s. It looked incredible on TV, but for a purist like Appice, it was a corruption of the drum solo. For Carmine, a drum solo is a musical conversation. It's a chance to show off your creativity, your technique, your command of rhythm. He came from a world where a solo's power came from your hands and feet, not from the altitude you were playing at. Tommy Lee's approach was completely different. His solos were events driven by pyrotechnics and engineering. The actual drumming often felt like an afterthought to the spectacle of the rig. To Appice, this was the ultimate victory of style over substance. He saw it as taking a serious art form and turning it into carnival entertainment. The focus was no longer on the music, but on the gimmick. What's fascinating is you can trace this conflict back to a single moment. On that tour with Ozzy, Appice saw Lee do a signature move where he'd spin a stick and grab the cymbal. When he asked Tommy where he got it, Lee said, "From John Bonham." Appice famously shot back, "Well, indirectly you got it from me," explaining that Bonham had picked up similar moves from him back when Led Zeppelin opened for Vanilla Fudge. He even had old Ed Sullivan show footage from 1968 to prove it. This story says it all. For Appice, the stick twirl was a bit of seasoning on top of a powerful, groove-based meal. For Tommy Lee and the generation he inspired, that seasoning was the meal. The showmanship that Appice helped pioneer was cranked up to 11, often drowning out the musicianship Appice held sacred. This makes Tommy Lee the perfect symbol of the 80s excess that a purist like Carmine just couldn't stomach. With our fourth drummer, the issue isn't about a lack of talent. It's about clashing personalities, professionalism, and two massive egos colliding. This spot belongs to a man who, like Appice, was a true pioneer of the instrument. Cream's Ginger Baker. Carmine Appice and Ginger Baker were friends, rivals, and contemporaries. They toured together in the late 60s and were both at the forefront of bringing double bass drums and a more aggressive polyrhythmic style to rock. Appice had immense respect for Baker's talent, admitting that when he first got his double bass kit, he looked to see what Ginger was doing. He considered Baker part of that elite club of rock drum icons, along with himself, Keith Moon, and Mitch Mitchell. So why is a drummer he respected on this list? Because talent doesn't always make you easy to work with. Ginger Baker was notoriously difficult and cantankerous. They didn't call the documentary about him "Beware of Mr. Baker" for nothing. Appice experienced this firsthand. He tells a story about a drum clinic he did in the 90s with Baker and Alan White from Yes. It was an educational event. Appice was teaching time signatures from his book, and White was breaking down complex Yes songs. Ginger, however, seemed to have zero interest in teaching anyone anything. According to Appice, Ginger got on stage just to bust our balls. He played a solo, and dryly announced it was in 4/4 time. He played another and said the same, then a third, with the same sarcastic delivery. It was a clear, grumpy jab at the technical, educational vibe of the clinic. It was Baker's way of saying that feel and raw attitude were all that mattered. For Appice, a man who dedicated his career to validating rock drumming as a serious field of study, this was a slap in the face. It was a dismissal of his entire philosophy. Appice believes knowledge makes you a better player. Baker's stunt positioned them on opposite sides, the schooled professional versus the instinctive, grumpy genius. Appice called Baker a handful and recalled how Alan White had to find him a bag of pot just to get him to cooperate at the clinic. While they could still go out for dinner and be friends afterward, the professional friction was undeniable. Baker's unpredictable nature was part of his legend, but for a consummate pro like Appice, it was a source of massive frustration. This wasn't about jealousy. It was a deep-seated annoyance with Baker's attitude, earning him a spot based not on his playing, but on his profoundly difficult personality. At number 3, we have a drummer whose name is basically a synonym for chaos, a man who played theedrums less like a timekeeper and more like a lead instrument, exploding across his kit with reckless joy. He's another of Appice's contemporaries from that first wave of rock gods, the Who's Keith Moon. Like with Ginger Baker, Appice's feelings about Keith Moon are a complicated mix of friendship, respect for his role as a fellow pioneer, and total confusion at his approach to the instrument. Appice and Moon were buddies who played tons of gigs together. Appice knew Moon was an innovator, but where Appice's innovation was about building a solid, powerful foundation, Moon's was about pure, glorious anarchy. Carmine, Appice's entire drumming philosophy is built on the groove. He's the engine, laying down a realistic rock beat for everyone else to lock into. Keith Moon, on the other hand, played as if the entire song was one long drum solo. He wasn't just keeping time, he was adding a constant stream of fills and cymbal crashes. It was a non-stop flurry of percussive commentary. For a drummer like Appice, this is musical madness. The drummer's first job is to lock in with the bass player and serve the song. Moon was often in his own rhythmic universe, playing in a way that was thrilling, but from a traditionalist's view, incredibly busy and disruptive. It was the polar opposite of Appice's in-the-pocket style. It was pure, beautiful chaos. Then, there was Moon's offstage behavior, which Appice saw up close. He called Moon pretty crazy and told a story that says it all. Appice was at a hotel with Moon when Keith, in a manic mood, suggested a drum battle. He then flipped a beautifully finished wooden television on its side, handed Appice some sticks, and started beating on it like a drum. Appice, caught in the moment, felt he had no choice but to join in. This isn't just a wild rock star story. It gets to the heart of Appice's frustration. For all his showmanship, Appice respects his instruments. Moon's willingness to destroy a piece of furniture for a laugh spoke to a level of anarchic disregard that was totally alien to Appice's professional mindset. While Appice loved Moon as a cool guy and a friend, he saw his musical approach as something from another planet. Appice built grooves, Moon created fireworks. In a 2019 interview, Appice talked about how drummers of his era didn't just copy their records live, they improvised. Keith Moon took that idea to such an extreme that even Appice, a fan of improvisation, found it to be on another level of chaos. That combination of a clashing musical philosophy and a personality that treated life like one big demolition derby puts the beloved Keith Moon on this list. Coming in at number 2 is probably the most controversial name on this list. He's arguably the most famous drummer in music history, yet his style is the complete opposite of Carmine Appice's thunderous approach. This spot belongs to the Beatles' Ringo Starr. Appice's issue with Ringo has nothing to do with personal conflict. In a weird twist of fate, despite being two of the most famous drummers of their generation, they've never actually met. Appice has met John, Paul, and George, but never Ringo. So this isn't personal. It's a purely philosophical and technical disagreement that goes all the way back to the beginning. In a candid interview, Appice admitted that when the Beatles first hit the scene, he thought they sucked. He heard a song like "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and found the musicianship completely unimpressive. You have to remember, at the time, Appice was a young guy playing in R&B bands and looking up to jazz masters like Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa, drummers known for their dazzling technique. In that world, Ringo's playing seemed almost childishly simple. Today, Ringo is celebrated for his incredible feel, his unique creativity, and his knack for always serving the song. He was subtle and never overplayed. But for a powerhouse like Appice, who was all about pushing the instrument to its physical limits, that subtlety was seen as a weakness. While Appice later grew to love the Beatles' songwriting, especially from Day Tripper on, his opinion of the drumming itself never really changed. In many ways, Appice's own style was a direct reaction against the kind of drumming Ringo represented. In the late 60s, Appice was pioneering a new kind of drumming that was loud, bombastic, and technically flashy. He used huge drums and hit them with incredible force to make a statement. He wanted the drummer to be an equal partner in the band's sonic assault, not just a timekeeper in the back. Ringo's entire approach was the opposite. He played for the song, not the spotlight. This is a fundamental, irreconcilable difference in what a drummer should be. Appice saw the drummer as a lead voice, an innovator capable of mind-blowing solos and powerful fills. He saw Ringo as a symbol of the old way, the simple backbeat player that he and his peers were rebelling against. For a guy who built his entire legacy on realistic rock, Ringo's minimalist style probably felt anything but. It lacked the fire, the flash, and the force that Appice considers the signature of a great rock drummer. Section 6, Number 1. The ultimate rival, John Bonham, and here we are at number 1. This is the most complex, personal, and painful relationship on the entire list. The number 1 drummer who clashed with Carmine Appice is a man he also called a friend, a man he helped get his first major endorsement, and a man many consider the greatest rock drummer of all time, Led Zeppelin's John Bonham. To say Appice hated Bonham completely misses the point. Their relationship was a toxic mix of friendship, rivalry, influence, and a deep, simmering resentment over who got the credit. The story starts on Led Zeppelin's very first American tour, when they opened for Vanilla Fudge. Appice and Bonham hit it off immediately. They were both Ludwig drummers, and they'd hang out at the side of the stage and throw spitballs at the other opening bands. But the real story started with the music. Appice was blown away by Bonham's bass drum on Good Times, Bad Times. When he complimented Bonham on the famous bass drum triplets, Bonham dropped a bombshell: "I got it from you." Appice couldn't believe it, but Bonham pointed to a specific 2-bar fill on a Vanilla Fudge record where Appice had played the pattern. Bonham admitted he took that little piece and built his iconic Stampede from it. This was the start of a lifelong frustration for Appice. Here was a drummer, about to become a global superstar whose most famous lick was, in his mind, lifted from him. It only got worse. Bonham was so impressed with Appice's giant Ludwig kit that he asked for help getting one. Appice, believing in the band, made a personal call to Ludwig and got Bonham an endorsement for the exact same oversized maple kit. On the next tour, Appice had to watch as Bonham, with his identical kit, started using Appice's signature moves, the stick twirls, the cymbal grabs, and would even look over at him and laugh while doing them. For a while, it was a friendly rivalry. But as Zeppelin's fame exploded and John Bonham was hailed as a drum god, it started to sour. Appice felt like he was being erased from his own story. For years, he couldn't even talk about it. As he put it, people saw Bonham as God, and God doesn't get anything from anybody. Whenever he mentioned his influence, people called him an egomaniac. He was trapped, watching another man get universal praise for a style he felt he had pioneered. You, can still hear the pain in his voice when he talks about it. He sees kids today praising the John Bonham triplets, knowing that he himself learned that lick from jazz legend Max Roach. He feels his contribution to rock history has been overlooked. It's not hatred for Bonham the person, whom he considered a friend. It's a deep resentment for what Bonham's massive legacy did to his own. It's the quiet frustration of the innovator being overshadowed by the more famous perfecter. He taught, Bonham learned. He pioneered, Bonham popularized. And the world only remembered Bonham. This incredible mix of friendship, stolen thunder, and the feeling of being turned into a footnote makes John Bonham the undeniable #1. So what's the big takeaway here? This list gives us a look inside the mind of a master craftsman, from the punk rock flailing of Lars Ulrich to the circus act of Tommy Lee, from the difficult genius of Ginger Baker to the joyful chaos of Keith Moon. These were the figures who clashed with Carmine Appice's core beliefs. He saw them as a departure from the fundamentals, a choice of style over substance. Add to that the understated simplicity of Ringo Starr, everything Appice was rebelling against, and the ultimate complex rivalry with John Bonham, the friend whose success, in Appice's eyes, came at the cost of his own credit as a pioneer. Carmine Appice is a purist who helped write the language of rock drumming. He holds himself and others to an incredibly high standard. Whether you agree with him or not, his perspective is a fascinating window into the mind of a legend who has earned the right to his strong opinions after a lifetime of mastering his art. What do you think of Carmine's list? Do you agree with his takes, or is he being too hard on these icons? Let us know in the comments below which one of these rivalries surprised you the most. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into rock and roll history, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching.